Hello and welcome to Guided Project 9-3. This is the final required video in the Microsoft Excel in Practice series that we've been working on throughout the course of the semester. And you might hear that it's the final one and you start making assumptions that it's going to be the most difficult one, the most challenging one, the most time-consuming one, the most conceptually complex one. Could not be further from the truth on any of these. This is by a mile the easiest of all the projects that are available in the series, and one of the easiest in the entire textbook. We're talking easier than chapter 1 was for most of everybody. This is going to be really the basics, but we're doing it for a specific reason, because it's going to, these super easy things we're going to be doing are going to be done with macros. What a macro is it's a mini program that you can write without having to have any knowledge of programming whatsoever. Maybe you have never programmed a single line of computer code in your life. You're going to be able to write complex programs just by hitting a record button when you want to start doing things and a stop button when you're done. If you can work a tape recorder or a DVD player or any sort of music player, you can create macros. Instead of talking about macros, let's jump right into this. I have started up SimNet. I have preloaded all of the assignments pages. If you haven't done this yourself while I was talking before, feel free to stop the recording now and catch up with me in a second. I am going to scroll down to the bottom of the list, and we've made it to the last of the Excel projects, Chapter 9, Guided Project 9-3. And I'll open it up and you'll see it's the familiar things that we see every time that we tackle a project. But notice that there's a resource file. These are one of those files that while you're in the middle of your project, you're going to have to access this file. All we have to do is we have to get a copy of it on our computer. So we click it, we open it with Windows Explorer, which is the default option. And we see that our resource file just has one folder in it. You don't have to open it up and look inside, but I'll do this so that you can see ahead of time. Inside is just one text file. It's a text document called expenses-09.txt. I'm going to double click this, and this is what it looks like inside. So we have some sort of category names and monthly amounts and some amounts for 3 different months. Apparently we're going to load this information in at some point in the future. We don't have to worry about that now. I'm just going to close that and go back to the folder. All you have to know is that that file is waiting in there, and I'm just going to click on the folder itself, EX 2013 Guided Project. I'm just going to click on that folder, hold down the mouse button, and drag it to Documents. Once I do, I can click on Documents, and you'll see I've put a copy in my system here, and we're ready to go. You can just use the big red X in the corner so that you can close that file, and you are now ready to begin the project itself. That starts always by opening the instructions with Adobe Reader. As usual, I'll place mine at the top and change a couple quick settings. And you can already see just how easy this project's going to be compared to most. Those 6 or 7 lines of description here just is reduced to one line that says that this company is requesting that a macro be created to automate an import process. That's it. That's the whole description, the entire task. You'll also go down to the start file. Remember, you have to start with the start file. You can't start on your own. And I'm going to open it in Excel, and I'll put Excel at the bottom half of the screen. As usual, there's going to be something that says Enable Editing, which we'll start with. And in my case, I'll move this to the bottom of the screen. And you might think you know the next step, because the next step is always to save the file. We actually have one. That's not step 2. We actually have one thing to do before we can do this. Here's the instructions. Tells us to download the resource file. We did that. Tells us to download the start file. We did that. We did enable editing. It says that the file automatically be renamed, and you can see that it has been. And now it would seem as though if it's time to jump in, wait, it doesn't say save. There's one extra step, and this is something that we've never had to do before. We are actually going to reveal a tab that contains some really powerful tools on it, and they're so powerful that this tab isn't shown by default. It says we're going to display a tab called Developer. If you look across the top, we have File and Home and Insert and all the rest of these. There is no Developer tab. These tools are hidden so that people don't take advantage of them and accidentally harm their computer because they don't know what they are. To get this, we're going to go do File and Options, which is at the very bottom. And you'll see there's an option here to customize the ribbon. I'm going to click that, and on this side, here's a representation of the ribbon as you see it now. Here's our Home tab. Home tab has clipboard, font, alignment groups. Clipboard, font, alignment. If we were to open this up, we can see the cut and paste that are in the clipboard area. The font buttons are all the things you see in font. This is a way of turning on sections of the ribbon and adding things to different things, customizing Office so that you can put buttons where you want them. You can even add entirely new tabs to create your own custom tabs for different things. And you can use their existing stuff, or you can use some of the macros. Here they give us a tab called Developer, which is ready to use. It's just hidden so that people don't get messed up in macros who don't know what macros are. I'm going to click the check marks in front of Developer and hit OK. And you'll see right now the end of the list has Data and Review and View and Team. The moment I click OK, now Developer appears at the end of the list. There's one new tab that we've never had the chance to see before. So we've added it. I've clicked on it for the first time so that you can see the sorts of things in here. First things it mentions are about macros. And this is a very, very powerful place to be. You don't want to start experimenting with buttons that you don't know what to do on this usually hidden tab. But we will learn what the macros are going to cover. There's a level of safety to be considered here. You don't want to run macros from strangers because they are essentially little programs. You could let people affect your computer. The first thing that we're going to do now that we have the tab is we're going to click the macro security button, which is right over here. This is going to let us tell the software what to do whenever there's a macro. Here, the most safe option is to just disable all the macros and don't even tell us what happens whenever you skip over one of them. We're going to make sure that the second option is chosen, or choose it if it isn't already. Disable all macros with notification. This means it won't run a macro, but it will tell us, I found a macro and I'm not running it. You can disable all macros except for something that has a professionally digitally signed element to it, so only company type macros can be run, but macros from regular people can't. And then the final is just let everything run, which is really dangerous because that's pretty much throwing away all your security. Make sure the second one is chosen, click OK, and now macros will be able to run on this. So essentially we've set up Excel to do a little more than it usually does. Now we're ready to save it. But even this is going to be different because by default macros are risky enough for people that don't know what they are and don't know how to use them, that the default situation is that you can't run macros in an Excel file. If you want to include runnable macros, like we're going to need to for our project, you have to do File and Save As. And you do the same thing where you pick which folder you're going to use. You're going to pick the name that you use. You'll actually notice this file includes an old naming system that uses initials and program names. You can go with what it gives you, where it fills in your name and adds it to the file name. Or if your instructor gives you other instructions, just guide those. But here's the tricky part. We always just click Save now, and it knows we want an Excel workbook. XLSX. I've gotten help from my cat at the moment, as you can tell. What we want to do is, if we're going to include macros, we have to specifically say that this is a file where macros are okay. So I'm going to drop down this list, and the second thing on the list says Excel Macro Enabled Workbook. If we don't choose this, our macros are useless. Nothing we do in this project will work because it's not macro enabled. The chapter is all about macros, so we better make sure we save macro enabled and click the Save button. The only difference is now that it's going to allow macros and the file name ends with an M instead of another X. A lot different to get started working, but actually getting started working is the hardest part of this entire project, so worth it if you reach this point. It's time to record our macro. There's going to be 3 macros that we're going to record. The first one will take this section of information here, and it's going to import the data from that text file we saved, that resource file. It's going to get its data from that resource file. And we're going to record that process so that if we ever want to do it again, We already have a macro that can do it for us. We're going to go from all the steps we do initially to just pressing one little button, and it'll take care of the entire import process for us. Let me show you how this works. We're starting with the record macro button, which is over here. Notice that they have you check something first. They say make sure that the use relative references option is off. That's right by the record button. If it's checked, you'll see it'll have a dark green background. If it's off, it'll look just like the rest. So mine's off right now. Make sure that yours looks the same, and it's time to hit the record macro button. This is like pressing record on a tape recorder, only instead of it recording over time, it just records whenever you do a step. So it doesn't matter how long you take. It's just going to go through the steps really quickly. I hit record, and we need a name. What do we call this program? It just says call it import, because we're going to use it to import data. Now there's something called a shortcut key, which is if you hit a combination of letters on the keyboard, it will automatically run this little macro for us. This is very familiar if you see Control S for saving your file. Sometimes you'll select things with Control A and things like that. This is just giving you the chance to assign something yourself, and they say just give it a capital I for import. Now in the future, if we hold down Control and we type a capital I, which requires Shift, this program will run. Now you always make sure it says this workbook for today's project, and then you give it a description. Imagine that you have hundreds of macros. What does this one do? So you give the description. This one imports the text file containing forecast information. Notice that the period is in red, so include the period here in the description. And now we have a name for it, a shortcut for it, a place for it, and a reminder of what it does. It's time to press OK and start recording. Now my hands are a little bit tied, just to give you advance notice. I'm not able to start switching around, undoing stuff, clicking different places, and doing the sorts of displays I do in most videos. I am now recording a set of instructions on the computer. And these instructions will be just what you need in order to import the information from that little text file we saved. Here's what we look like at the start. We want to look like this in the end, where all this information is imported. So we're going to start by clicking A4, which is where we want our information to go. I'm in the right place. Now we want to import data. They actually give you the hint for how you're able to do this. You do data. You want it from text. Remember we had that txt file as a reference. We click the button. We find it. Here's our Excel 2013 resources for this project. There's our file. And we open it. Now we have to choose some options. You can see why this would be a little bit frustrating if you had to do this hundreds of times every time you updated it. It's delimited. We can tell that there's like spaces or commas or something between these. So it's delimited. And then look at the first row. Do we have headers? Yep, here's a header that says expense. Here's a categories header. Here's a monthly budget header, a January, February, March header. So we do have headers, so we check that. And we jump to the next page of the wizard. What is the delimiter? Is it a tab? Well, we can see when tab is selected, it looks correct. If we were to choose comma, that doesn't quite look right. So we're going to use tab. Then we can head to the next column, and here's our chance where we can specify what the data is, so that when it imports it, it treats it the right way. You can always have text in a cell, you can have numbers in a cell, you can format things to look special like dates and things like that, or you can have formulas. We don't have to worry about formulas now. Look at this column. Does it look like text or does it look like numbers? Remember, the top line is just the label, so that doesn't count. Yeah, this is definitely text. These are all words here. What about this column? Is it numbers or is it text? You can skip the top, that's just the label. This is numbers. Notice that general says it converts numeric values to numbers. This means if it sees the symbol for the number 4, it turns it into 4, the actual value 4. So it's changing it from a symbol like you would type on a keyboard to an actual numeric value. So we'll leave it at general because it is a number. This looks like numbers, stays general. This looks like numbers, stays general. That looks like numbers, stays general. Now we can finish. It asks us where we want to put it, and A4 is already chosen, and we click OK, and all that data comes in from the file. Now think about all the steps that involved. I just spent maybe 2 minutes getting this information in here. We don't want to take 2 minutes every time we try to get information in like this. What we want to do is click a single button and that'll be accomplished. Well, luckily, if you go back to the Developer tab, we've been recording this whole time. All of those steps that we just did got recorded. You'll see that the next step it says is click Stop Recording because we're done with the process. And it looks like nothing happened. But that recording has been saved for us. When I click the macros list here, remember you don't have to do this, this is just for show. When I click the macros list, it shows that we now have one macro. It would let us run it, would let us edit it, delete it. We'll see what step into is a little while. We've recorded a macro. It's hidden in the system somewhere. Now I said this was a pretty easy project, and here's a little more proof on this one. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to create a second macro, and then we'll create a third as well. So we're repeating the process that we just had. Record macro, we'll give it a name. Totals, we'll give it a shortcut key, capital T. Notice I'm just hitting tab now to switch between these options. I don't have to click them all. Store it in this workbook like always, and give it a description. Adds total formulas. And make sure you have the period because that's in red too. So what does this mean? We're going to record something that allows us to put the total, the sum, of these four numbers down here. And the sum of these four numbers down here, these four down here, these four down here. We're going to record the process of adding all of those sums. When I click OK, we're now recording. And I'm just going to follow the process they describe above. I'm going to put sum formulas in B9 through E9. And then we'll hit stop when we're done. So here, how do we write a simple sum formula? Equals, and we type sum. Doesn't have to be capital letters, but that is the custom. We open parentheses. We choose the range we want. We close the parentheses. This is really chapter 2 kind of stuff. And then we hit enter. There's our sum of these four values. And you can see 40,000, here's another 7 plus 3, that makes 50,000, and a little room. The number looks right. So the formula is good, and then I could do the same thing for all these three, but if you remember, talk about the fill handle earlier in the series, I can just grab that little green corner down here, make sure the cursor changes to the thin black plus, drag it to the others, and it'll automatically copy some formulas there. So I've done what it asks up here in step D. I've put in at the addition formulas, the sum formulas for those, so I can stop recording now. Again, doesn't appear that anything happened, but when I click macros, now we have the original import and we have totals. It's just coincidence that they're recorded with the first one we did on top and the last one we did at the bottom. They're actually in alphabetical order. They just happen to coincidentally match. You'll see that will not follow path in the next example because we need a third macro. In the third macro, just says create a third. In the third macro that we record, we are going to clear out all the information that we loaded in like this. So we'll just turn all this into blank space. We need another macro, so they're going to drill down this process. You record macro, you give it a name, which is clear. You give it a shortcut key, which we'll use capital C, stored in this workbook, and this description is deletes all imported information and the totals. Include the period because it's in red. Click OK, and now we're recording. What does it want us to do? We're going to delete the contents of cells A4 through E4. So here's A4. We go down to over to E4, and then it says it actually is A4 through E8. This is A4 through E8, so we chose this range, and we're going to delete them, which means physically pressing the delete key on your keyboard. This is between the section where there's letters on the left and numbers on the right edge. There's also the arrow keys right below it. Delete it. It's really close to the backspace key too. When you hit delete, you'll get a warning, and it says click yes to delete the import query warning, which is what we're looking at. So we click yes. The data that we imported from that file is now gone. Now if you go to the cells where we had formulas before, you'll see that the formulas are still in place. So now they'll ask us to select those and delete them too. Again, delete button on the keyboard. And now those cells are blank. We're done recording, so we just press stop recording. And we go to the macros list, and now we have 3. Alphabetically, clear is first, that's the one we just made. Import was our first, totals was our second. We have all 3 of our macros here ready to go. So what do we want to do in order to make this work? We want a quick way to run those functions. If we were to run them now, we'd have to go through the whole process of selecting them through this. We're just going to make buttons that we can click the button once and it takes care of things for us. In order to do this, we need insert controls. You'll see that because this is hidden powerful stuff, we don't use the insert tab whenever we want to add something related to it. There is a hidden set of things that you can insert only from the developer tools. This is just to keep things safe. I'm previewing ahead to say that we need lines 11 and 12, so I'll scroll down in advance. Here's 11 and 12. I'm going to click in 13 just below it. You'll see that'll help in a second. And I want to insert a control. A control is any of the stuff that you would use to interact with a web page. Like, for instance, in this case, it's buttons. That's the very first option. But all the stuff that you see on web pages and various other software is here. Check marks are here. Radio buttons are here. Drop-down lists are here. Labels are here. All of these different things are called controls. They just tell us to use a button. Once they do, our cursor is going to change to this little cross thing that allows us to draw. It tells us to create a button that covers A11 through A12. So I'm going to go to the top of A11. I'm going to hold down the mouse button. I'm just going to draw a rectangle that takes us through A12. And I'll let go. And it's going to switch to the next instruction. Which macro do we want this button to run? It tells us to choose import and click OK. We now have a button right on our worksheet that allows us to run our macro. Now it has a stupid name, button text. We're going to have to change that. So if you right click on it and choose edit text, we can change the name. I'm going to get rid of what's there, and I'm just going to put import, because that's what it does. It runs the import macro. I'll click outside of it so you can see the button is done, and it has that new name. So I'm going to just click somewhere so now you can see the button control. That's what I just did. I said this is a very easy project. It's just repetitive here. We want another button that will go from C11 to C12. So it's going to cover these two. I like clicking in C10 so that you can kind of estimate where the button will be. Just lets you predict what size to make it a little bit easier. I am going to now go to this exact same process, insert and button. My cross changes, and notice I'm preparing to draw. Now that box might disappear the moment I hold down the mouse button, so I get a good view of where it is, and I start drawing the button to what is I think approximately the size of the C column. When I let go of the mouse, it's going to ask me which button do I want. This time it wants totals, and I OK it. The name is pretty lame, so I'm going to click in there and change the name again. Remember, you could also right click and do edit text, and I'll just say totals and click outside. You'll see I didn't get it perfect, but there'll be instruction coming up allowing us to modify that. And then the last one, we're going to put a button at E11 through E12. So I'm clicking on E10 so I can estimate the size. And I'm going to draw a button. Notice they're even shortening up how they describe it. It says just draw a button that covers that. So I've chosen button, there's my little cross. I'm going to estimate where it goes, and then draw a button approximately that size. I let go, it asks me which. The only thing left is clear. I'll change it. I can click in here, get rid of the old name, replace it with clear. Click anywhere else. You'll see I didn't get it exact, that's fine. I've changed its name to clear. Now all we have to do is adjust the sizes of these to be a little more perfect. If you wanted to do that, this one's pretty okay. I could make it a little bit smaller. All you have to do is point at the button, right click on it, and you'll get these little dot controls. You can click anywhere else to get rid of that menu that pops up. Then you can grab the edge and just drag it slightly where you want it. Now when I click on the cell, that's a little bit better match. This one is a little too far to the left and a little too far to the right. It just has to be smaller on each side. Right click on it, click anywhere else to get rid of the menu. I'll make this a tiny bit smaller here, tiny bit smaller there. Now when I click outside, it looks like it lines up pretty well. I'll do the same process again for this button. It's pretty good on the right. It's a little too large on the left. Right click on it, click anywhere, and then grab the little handle to make it smaller. So that's what this step was all about. There's just one other thing that we'll do to these buttons, and the process is pretty much done. We'll just get to see it in action from this point out. What we're going to do is we're going to change the properties of the button so that as different things happen on screen, it doesn't move where the buttons are. We want it so that these buttons stay in place even if you start adding more lines on it. The buttons aren't going to move. You just right click on the button itself and you choose Format Control. You'll get some options. You get a whole lot of options actually, and this gives us the instructions for exactly where we'll find things. We choose Format Control, and actually I want to make sure that I got that right. Format Control, and we're going to choose the Don't Move or Size with Cells radio button on the Properties tab. So we have a bunch of tabs up here. Here's Properties, and we want Don't Move or Size with Cells. So now that's locked in place, it's locked in the size it is, we OK it, and now it is permanently there in that shape no matter what else we do to the worksheet. It's a repetitive task, so you got to do it a couple more times. Don't move or size with cells, OK. Do it for the last one, Format Control, Properties, Don't Move or Size with Cells, OK. Now we've changed all of those controls so that they won't move. We've got the OK button here. Now all that's left is to test it. There's actually going to be one little tweak in place because they intentionally designed this to give us an error so that we can see how to fix errors. We're going to look at this area up here. We're going to click Import. If it works properly, we should get all the data again. I click Import, but it gives us a problem. And like I said, this was a preloaded problem just so we could learn this. If you get a problem, you can hit Debug, and you'll actually see the instructions that happen whenever you run that program. You might recognize some of these if you look closely enough. Here we have delimited. Apparently that has something to do with when we chose that it was a delimited file as opposed to by space. You'll see all the different options that we chose along here. And this is just the computer's version of what we did. This is what it recorded at whenever we had the record button down. Here's what it recorded when we were doing totals. Here's what it recorded when we were clearing contents. This is our program right here. And if we go back to our instructions, you'll notice this is actually in its own window too. This isn't part of Excel. Well, it's part of Excel, but it's not directly part of Excel. It's a program that Excel is now running. When we go back to the instructions, it says to open up this code window, we see the computer code here. We open up the computer code and we'll see the line that's giving us trouble. This command line 0. What we see in this window is that it tried running all the instructions, and when we hit the little yellow arrow, it hit this instruction, I clicked just after it, and the one in yellow gave us trouble. Sometimes that happens, and they intentionally made sure that this would happen for us. And they just say, in this case, get rid of it. Just delete over it. And even when I hit the end, I'll hit delete a couple more times so that the empty line goes away. And then I'll close this window. I've gotten rid of the one that was a problem. Just as the instructions say here, they say close, and then you can OK the message about stopping the debugger. There's our debugger message, and we OK it. And that new window goes away. We have fixed the program. Now the fix isn't always to delete the line that's giving you trouble. It would be great if it was, but in this case, that's all we need to do. We've deleted it. Notice we're already on page 3 out of 4. This is a fast-moving program. So we've gotten rid of the problem line, and now it just says to rerun the macros. I'm up at where this should first appear, and when I click import, it loads that file for us. We didn't have to go through all those different steps. It's been recorded, and now we can run it just by pressing a button. Remember, we took all those different steps to write all those sum formulas down here? If I want the formulas back, I just click totals, and it runs it all. If I want to clear them all out, then I just clear it. I'm already looking at some problem here, expense categories. This isn't one of the things that they gave wrong, but apparently I did something extra about expense categories. So I'm going to click Visual Basic, and that opens up that window again. I can look for anything in here that mentions something about expense categories, and clearly there's where some of the trouble occurred. So I could take the time to straighten this out. It was just some extra click somewhere. I can get rid of something like this, save it myself, and when I close it, I'll get rid of the copy that's there. When I close it, now when I run the macros, this one puts in the initial information, this one puts the totals, and you see I was able to manually correct the problem I saw by hitting the Visual Basic editor, finding which line looked like the trouble, and just getting rid of the line. So sometimes you'll use that debugger when it instantly sees a problem and it'll tell you where the problem line is. Other times, like now, you have to go in, figure out where the problem line is, and get rid of it. The more you know about that programming language, Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA, the more you know about that programming language, the easier this will be. But I can go through this process over and over again. Import this, import that, clear it all. I can keep importing and clearing it all day long, and it's nothing more than just a couple clicks at this point. Import totals, clear. So now we've found this is what macros are all about. If you have to do something a dozen times over, for instance, if you were constantly grabbing 9 columns, merging and centering them, making the text bold, changing it to green, changing it to italics, changing it to bold, changing it to underline, changing the font to a different font style. If you have to do that over and over and over again for a bunch of lines, just record a macro that does it the first time you do it, and then you can run the macro every time you have to do it from that point on. If you wanted to do something as complex as separating out lines, like creating a new page every time you see a certain word, and you don't want to have to edit through that whole process, you could search for the word, insert a division, and then just click the macro again, and then again and again. So this is what macros are about. You are creating little programs that are like the buttons that you see up on the ribbon, only you've written them. There, you'll find if you were to follow this up, do a little more learning on these, you can actually put these on your ribbon itself, so that you don't even need to create these buttons at the bottom. You could just add them to the ribbon like we added the developer tab itself, and we would be able to run them straight from the tab. Simple way to show you that as it happens. Going back to exactly how we enabled the developer tab, I say customize ribbon. I'm going to intentionally choose this to stay on the developer tab, and I'll put it in this modifier group. Here's the popular commands. We can just switch to macros. Remember, this isn't part of the project. This is just a little bit of extra. I can say clear, import, and total I will add to the group. I'd have to make my own group. I'll just leave it called new group. Here's clear, and I add it. Import, and I add it. Totals, I add it. I OK it. And you'll see they even appear right on the ribbon. Here's import, and it runs it. I'll add the totals. I'll clear it. So this is an option that and I'm now customizing the software in a way that isn't even on the instruction sheet, and you can see how easy it is to advance your understanding. We have 2 saves to do at this point. First, we're going to save it just as it is. Doesn't matter if I have these added. That's part of access. It's not part of the file. But if you want to get rid of it just to be safe, same idea. Options, customize the ribbon. Here's our new group. I'm just going to go in there and remove this, remove that to return it so that you can see that there's no problem with the extra stuff that I showed you. That was just so you can see an extra skill that wasn't included in the guide. I OK it. Those buttons are gone. Time to save. So first I save. And that saves the XLSM file. That's the macro enabled one. So now we're ready to use those in the future. There's just one extra step, because SimNet doesn't allow you to send macro enabled files. So you'll have to do save as this time. You can pick the exact same location. Only this time we're going to change it from XLSM back to XLSX. This will just be a plain workbook, not a macro-enabled one. The macros will still be in there, so you'll be able to grade them. You just can't run them. So I save it. Gives me a warning that some things can't be done. You just click yes on that. The instructions give you that tip too, to say yes. Now all that's left is uploading and saving. We're done with this project already. I say upload. If I tried to do the XLSM and OK it, it's going to reject it. It says it has to be XLSX. So don't worry about uploading that wrong one. Get the correct one, XLSX. Do open, it's going to upload it. Are you ready to submit? I say yes. And when you prepare the result here, our final grade is 67. Simple solution. I left it blank. So, as always, this is our chance to download it again. I'm just hitting the back button here to fix my file. While I was showing you that you could do the different import and totals and clear over and over again, I left it blank. I hit import, I hit totals, I save it again. Now, when I submit it, choosing the XLSX, yes, I submit it. It's going to regrade it. And now we're at a 100. So yes, that 67 even put a scare into me, which is great when it's the last video in the file and it's the last minute of that video. It really is nice to give myself a scare here. But the only problem was, in my original version, I had pressed clear as the final thing, so it didn't have any of the data in it. As you can see now, after clicking import and totals, it put it all back for me, and we are back up to our 100 for this project. Nice to have a rough ending to a very long video series. But at this point, if you can do this, if you can do the different things that you saw in chapters 1 through 5, and you can work with the macros to make your work even easier and take out the repetitive tasks, you are at the point where you are securely an intermediate user of this software. If you're interested in building your way up to expert status, feel free to hunt down the bonus videos that I'll have for chapters 6 and 7 and 8 and 10 in time. That will get you to know all the ins and outs, even the stuff that it's very unlikely that you'll use. But At this point, you are definitely secure in your intermediate status, and you're going to have skills that allow you to carry most professional projects and using just your skill set. Play with what you have, learn, maybe even think about how to merge a bunch of different ideas from the various chapters together. It's best to synthesize this all, but if nothing else, be happy that there's another 100 in the books if you followed along, and I will see you in the next video series, which deals with Microsoft Access, the database program that expands on the way that Excel might store things and turns you into even more of a programmer than these macros did. I'll hope to see you soon, and hope you'll be taking advantage of these skills.